Hello, welcome. I am recording this podcast on my 1 year anniversary of the Sunlight podcast, and I just wanted to take a second to celebrate and also to thank you, whether you are tuning in for the very first time today or recently, or whether you've been with me since episode 1. This podcast wouldn't be here without you. And I have found so much joy in connecting with you through my DMs on Instagram, occasionally through emails. And I just love it when you tell me what resonated with you, when a light bulb went off for you. And for those of you who send me suggestions for future episodes, I love that so much because, I have to think of a new topic every week. So it's always nice when I get suggestions. And of course, when I get the same suggestion more than once, then I know that it's really something that's on a bunch of people's minds. So I keep a running spreadsheet of all your show suggestions. So I want you to know I really do pay attention, and I do often record episodes based on those. So I just want to thank you again for listening. I'm so glad you're here. And, I'll just be really upfront about why I did start this podcast, both for me and for you. It's because I have been noticing, my mental health not doing so great because of social media. And I have daughters, and I want to model something healthy for them and not be on Instagram all the time. And if you're running a small business, if you're an artist, if you're somebody who's a healer, a lot of us who have businesses, we feel kind of stuck on Instagram. Like, we want to get off. We know it's bad for us, but because of our business, we really need it to access new audiences and just announce things. And I was really noticing that because of this, it's really hard to extract myself from social media. And yet the connection that I want to have with you is much deeper than like a 30-second reel, And when I'm going to really thoughtfully put together some content to teach you about taxes, it takes more than 60 seconds, right? So I have tried to fit myself into the box that Instagram requires of me. And I finally just was like, no, screw that. I want to do this my way. I want to connect with you in the way that I think is valuable to you and valuable to me, also good for both of our mental health. And I want to be able to really go deeper on things like, the standard deduction or or issues you might have with your accountant. So the podcast has been a really wonderful place because we get to go really deep. I really feel, even though I don't hear your feedback immediately, it is a feedback loop that I really enjoy, where I can put out content that is very sensitive. It's more deep. It's more emotional. It feels more connected and more aligned, to me, in the business I want to be running. So I hope you appreciate that. I hope you feel the same way. I don't know if you too have been trying to get off the socials. Of course, I still have a presence on Instagram. That is sort of a fact of running a business, but I'm trying to minimize it. So anyway, send me a note. Ironically, through Instagram at Sunlight Tax. Send me a note if that resonates with you. I'm curious what your relationship is with social media these days. Certainly the podcast for me has been one path to connect with people off of social media. Now, I think the content on a podcast is so much better, so much deeper, so much more interesting. But the real problem is spreading it. It is very hard to grow. So I'm just delighted, those of you who are listening. It is so wonderful, and I value you so much. The one thing that Instagram does do that podcasts don't do without just massive effort is grow, grow the number of listeners that I have. So to that end, if you hear an episode that resonates with you and you have friends who you think could benefit, you are doing me such an enormous good turn when you share it. And I'm just especially grateful for you for doing that, because growing a podcast is beastly hard. So if you value this, you can really show your appreciation by sharing the podcast with a friend, maybe 5 friends. All right. Thanks for that. And yay, 1 whole year. I feel like it's a big milestone for me. It was a really heavy lift starting a podcast. It was something I wanted to do for years and simply didn't have the capacity. So it's been really exciting to get to a point where I could hone down my business to a small enough place where I could handle the massive work involved in running a podcast. All right. With that all said, something I want to bring to you today is, I think, a really cool episode. I had a popular episode before about kind of interacting with accountants. I know not all of you listening have accountants, but many of you are maybe thinking about, do I need one? Do I not need one? So even if you don't have an accountant, this episode is going to be relevant for you, whether it's just because you're thinking, maybe I will, maybe I won't, in that decision-making headspace, or because one day down the line, you might want to have an accountant. And so what I'd like to do for you today is to clarify what you don't get when you work with an accountant. So today's episode is about the biggest mistakes that I see people make when they begin working with an accountant. Okay. If you like this episode or you feel like this is a juicy topic, I have much, much more to say on this. So send me a note. I'll do another one. We could do a follow-up. But for today, the mistakes that I see people making when they work with an accountant, whether for the first time or even after many, many years. All right. So let's get started. First of all, I think a big mistake when you decide you're going to pay the money to work with a tax professional or an accounting professional is working with somebody who doesn't get your industry, who doesn't get your world, right? Now, most accountants sort of understand business in a kind of basic way, right? You sell widgets and so if your business operates in a similar way to a generic business, you might be fine. But there are some special rules in the tax codes for some special industries. Maybe the most extreme version of that is agriculture. If you are a farmer, good Lord, you definitely need to work with somebody who specializes in farmers, who has a massive portion of their clients are farmers, because the agricultural rules in this country are very complex. They change every year. There's a lot to keep on top of. And you simply don't want to be working with an accountant who kind of knows, but is going to miss a whole bunch of stuff that is really meant to benefit you in the tax code. Now, if you're listening to this podcast, you are probably not a farmer, because I am not a specialist in agriculture. Like, I get to help you depreciate your fruit trees, and I have, helped somebody with their passive solar greenhouse. I have had a couple farming clients, but I'm not really a specialist in that area. And farmers, you should get a specialist. What I am a specialist in is the creative industries. Not just art. I am a fine artist myself, as you know, but also design, architecture, UX, UI design, anything that maybe, anything that's creative. So this can be all kinds of things, from products to services, web-based stuff, anything. Anybody who uses design thinking in their work, right? And something that I see with accountants is that there's a real sense of alienation between accountants and creative people. Now, of course, this isn't a fair statement about all accountants. And I'm an example of an accountant who completely gets creative people, because I am one. But I do think that culturally, there's a lot of conservatism in accounting and a lot of orientation towards a sort of traditional model of business. And in some of the funkier parts of the creative world, it's not as clear-cut and straightforward how what you're doing fits into a model of business. And yet it does, right? So me as an artist, for example, being a fine artist is one of the most extreme versions of this. So, for example, one of the things that I see in my practice all the time, and I know authentically as an artist, is that we artists will do things that do not appear to have an immediate profit motivation, right? They don't appear to have a business purpose. And yet what they're actually doing is developing prestige or reputation, which if you are an artist yourself, an artist accountant yourself, you can know, as I do, that that move towards prestige, towards publicity, towards reputation building actually does circle back and help you to increase the price of your work in a way that is serving a business purpose. So actually, there is a business purpose in giving things away for free, doing big splashy things for exposure. I'm not advocating you do only work for exposure or for free, please. This is something I hate about the creative industries, but people do things for free or do things with waiving their fee on purpose to be seen in the right setting, to be mixing with the right people, on purpose to make those connections to eventually get opportunities that open up for them that will benefit the business side of their practice down the road. You have to have some knowledge, some inner knowledge of the way the art world works to understand that, though, because on its face, it's not clear what is happening. Okay, so that's an example of why it can be so important to work with somebody who gets your world. Now, I do think that the fine arts are the most extreme part of this world. We're like fine artists, performance artists, people doing really kind of funky, wild, cutting edge work. You are the ones who suffer the most here, right? It is the most hard to understand how what you're doing is a business. And yet sometimes when you are on the cutting edge, when you are kind of aiming for the critical review and not necessarily the money, you are the one most well positioned to, get the Guggenheim or the MacArthur Genius Award, right? And I've worked with many artists who have had those awards, right? MacArthur Geniuses and Guggenheim grantees. So there is actually, though it's more of a crapshoot, it's more like, becoming a professional basketball player and having odds of success like that. You are aiming at this narrow window where you do get a really, you have the potential for a big financial benefit on the other side of all that work, even though it looks like you're not doing it for money per se. All right. Now, I do think that designers, creative people in other zones, the design world, the interactive design, like online world, the other parts of design, you can also have problems with accountants because of this disconnect, even when you are running something that looks much more straightforwardly like a business. If you're an architect, for example, you're going to have clients, you're going to have contracts with the clients, they're going to pay you a retainer, pay you a fee, and that can be much more straightforward. And yet, it's very likely that you feel at times with certain accountants a sense of cultural alienation, like they're not your people and you're not their people and you don't get each other. And so they might respect the fact that you are a business, but they might just let slip these derogatory comments about you being creative, and maybe because of that you're flaky or disorganized, right? Stuff that is not truly fair. And I think, honestly, to me, that is the number one reason not to work with an accountant. If you are getting even a whiff of disrespect as you work with an accountant, I think you shouldn't do it. Because I think, and I say this from experience, in my tax practice, I handle some of the most sensitive issues that ever come up. People are more scared to talk about their money in relationship with their spouse, than they are to talk about, sex or mental health challenges. Money can be so loaded and sensitive that if you're not working with a professional that you feel safe with, you're just not going to get any of the questions answered that you need to. So that sense of safety, that sense of being, is this my people? I think that is really important when you work with an accountant. So my number one tip, if you're trying to find an accountant, and it doesn't need to be me, this is anybody that you work with, is make sure you feel respected when you're in the room. Okay. Now, another thing I think is a mistake is not knowing to ask about new tax credits. This one takes a little bit. You need to have a sort of baseline understanding. It's really hard to keep on top of new legislation. The Biden administration, and this is a good thing, has passed so many bills with so much benefit to taxpayers that there are all these wonderful tax credits that you may be eligible for this year that you're not aware or even out there, right? So some kind of way to have a baseline level understanding of like what's coming out in the tax code and what you don't have to know exactly the mechanisms of the law and how it works and if you definitely qualify or not, but you have to have enough awareness to ask about it, to think, oh, I bought a clean vehicle this year. Could I be eligible for that new clean vehicle tax credit? That's all you need to know, but you need to know enough to ask the question, right? So some general sense of what legislation has been happening and if you might qualify, okay? That is something that you need. And I find a lot of people miss a lot of tax credits because they are not aware that there is a new tax credit, so they don't ever think to ask. Now, I feel very proud of the work that I do. This is something I see as my duty to my clients. And it's one of the benefits of my program, Money Bootcamp, that every single person in Money Bootcamp, actually ever, gets access to tax updates every time they come. So I always do a training when there's new tax legislation. If it's very minor, sometimes I just make a very short training that's just basically an outline that says it and links to the place where you sign up or the place that you find out more. But a lot of times it's quite extensive, right? You know, this is all the new tax things that got passed at the end of the year. So going into the new tax season, these are the things you need to know, and these are how you get them. So I do that not even once a year, I do it many, many times a year. Anytime any new legislation is passed, I update everyone who's in Money Bootcamp. So if you join Money Bootcamp, you know that, and I guarantee that you will get this for at least a year, but I've frankly never taken anybody off my list, and people do continue to get these. But if you're in Money Bootcamp, you do continue to get updates every single year, every time tax legislation comes out that's going to affect you, you will know it's coming. And so if you're working with an accountant, you will know exactly what to ask and exactly what to bring to them to get your credits. And just to give you like a tiny example of the legislation that I've done updates on just this year, student loan forgiveness. There was a part 1 that got struck down by the Supreme Court. I did the training on that, then it got struck down, and I did a second training when the second version came across. The Secure Act 2.0 is this legislation that the Biden administration passed, which is awesome, which is about being able to put more money into your tax advantage retirement accounts, and also expanding the rules for accessing that money during certain emergency situations. So it's a really powerful piece of legislation that helps taxpayers put more money away for your retirement, for your, fuck you money, as I like to call it. And so I did a training about all those new rules, how to access them, and when they start to go into effect, because not all of them go into effect in 2023. The Inflation Reduction Act, the largest piece of climate legislation ever to be passed in the United States, came with a bevy of tax credits for people buying clean vehicles, new or used, making energy efficient home improvements, and a whole bunch of other stuff. So I did a big training on the Inflation Reduction Act. I could go on. There's lots of other pieces of legislation that have come down the pike as well as just every year's December tax updates. So every year Congress passes extenders and certain credits expire. And so you need an annual update every January to say, these are what got extended, these are what expired, and these are the new things coming down the pike. So that is a thing that is always relevant every single year. And it's something I do provide inside Money Bootcamp that I don't talk about enough. So I just thought I would mention it today on the podcast. I do think that if you listen to this podcast, I do tend to put at least a portion of those updates on the podcast. So you're getting some of it, probably enough that you could ask the right questions of your accountant. I just want you to know that if you're in boot camp, you get the full training with the outline and the links and all this stuff. So another thing that I think a lot of people make a mistake with when they work with an accountant is that they assume that they're getting more than a tax return. And the fact is you don't. As sad as that might feel, I know that from the perspective of you, creative person, especially if you're at the beginning of your career and just starting out and you're very budget conscious, this was me when I started. Like, I know exactly how this feels because I did this too. I went to my dad's accountant and it felt like a lot of money paying like a full service, prestigious accountant money. It feels like a lot of money, right? And so because it felt like so much money to me, I thought that meant that I would get, advice, tax planning, the ability to ask all my questions. And I didn't realize that if I couldn't fit in, I could only get to ask, maybe 5 minutes worth of questions during our tax appointment. And if it went longer than that, I would have to get him on the phone or make a meeting and I would be charged his hourly rate for those questions. I didn't realize that. So the baseline for working with accountants is that when you pay for a tax return for a tax preparation, all you get is tax preparation. You don't get guidance, you don't get advice, you don't get tax planning, and you don't get more than, 5 to 10 minutes of your questions answered without paying additional money at their hourly rate. So it's important to know that that is the industry standard in accounting. And it's part of the reason that I developed the program that I did, Money Bootcamp, because you need all that stuff. You need to know how to put money into retirement accounts. You need to know the difference between the different types of IRAs and when you should prioritize this kind of IRA versus that kind of IRA, and which ones you could put more money than the $6,500 that you can put into a traditional or a Roth. So the purpose to me of creating a program like Money Bootcamp is basically to give you a really holistic view of how those tax planning pieces, those retirement pieces, those like commonly asked questions, how they all fit in a logical flow, in a logical order, and give you that full tax education that you might think you're going to get if you work with an accountant, and you don't. And then lastly, and more specifically, when you are a self-employed person, when you make your income from your own work, from being self-employed, it's federally mandated that you be paying your taxes quarterly, not annually. Okay, this is the actual law, even though people don't realize it. This is true, and it's the law. You have to pay your taxes every quarter. And if you don't, then you will be paying penalties and interest for the fact that you aren't doing it. Okay. So I think a lot of people also, even if they know about quarterly taxes, they expect more guidance from their accountants than they actually are getting. Most accountants don't do any project management. They don't send reminders. Some of them do, and that's great. And if you have someone like that, keep them because they're really good. That's above the traditional. But accountants don't generally send you reminders about upcoming quarterly tax deadlines. They certainly don't say, 2 to 3 weeks ahead of time, now is the time to get your bookkeeping done. You want to make sure you do your real-time calculation for your estimated quarterly taxes. Okay. So you want to be really conscious that you need to put those things on your calendar. You need to stay on top of your quarterly taxes. And you need to meet those deadlines. Nothing about having an accountant that you pay to do your tax prep once per year. Nothing about that is going to trigger in their system reminders or project management that you keep on top of your taxes throughout the year. So be careful of that assumption. The other thing I want you to know about is that when it comes to estimated quarterly taxes, and this will get a little bit into how quarterly taxes actually work, estimated quarterly taxes are just that. They are estimates. You are prepaying your tax as you go throughout the year so that when it comes to your April tax filing, you're making change. You're basically saying, okay, here's how much I actually made through the year versus how much I thought I would make. And here's how much I paid in taxes through my quarterly tax payments in advance of the tax deadline. And then the tax return's role is to reconcile those two amounts. So essentially, this is what I thought I would owe in taxes. And so that's how much I paid versus this is how much when I actually look at all my tax credits and the little details, this is how much I actually owed. And so if you overpaid your quarterly taxes, you get a refund, which is awesome. And if you underpaid, of course, you still owe. You owe a bill. Now, the thing is, there's two different ways to calculate your estimated quarterly tax payment amounts. In other words, two different safe harbor thresholds that help guide you to paying in approximately the right amount. We know the amount's never going to be exact. The role of the tax return is to reconcile the inexactness. So there's nothing wrong with getting the number wrong. I just want to reassure you. But there's two different safe harbor thresholds whose job is basically to help you guesstimate the right amount of tax based on what you're earning for the year. And what I want you to understand about how accountants work is that one of these is easy to calculate and the other is not. And two guesses which one you're going to get from your accountant. You get the easy one. And that's not shade on accountants. Accountants are not doing wrong by giving you the one easy version, right? They will calculate your estimated quarterly taxes based on the first safe harbor rule, which says if you pay 100% of the tax you owed last year broken up into quarters, divided by 4, so once per quarter over the course of this year, you're meeting the first of the two safe harbor thresholds. Okay. So if you do that, you don't get penalties and interest. And that's a good thing. And your accountant is trying to save you from penalties and interest. And again, that is a good thing. They are doing their job, and that's good. But the problem with this method, one, is that most accountants aren't going to really teach you how they work. And so what I find is a lot of people that come to me have really, even though they're in this boat, even though they've been paying quarterly taxes for years, they have no idea why or how it works or how to make any adjustments. So that safe harbor threshold I was just telling you about, paying 100% of last year's tax in quarters this year, that works just fine when your income is the same this year that it was last year. But here's the thing. Who among you makes the exact same amount of money every year? In my experience, creative people, healers, people with their own businesses, we don't tend to have completely stable income. It tends to go up and down and up and down. And we're riding the waves of the economy, of our clients' desires, etc. Right? There's lots of factors that could make your income be much bigger this year or much lower this year. And that paying 100% of last year's tax, it'll save you from penalties and interest, and that's great. But it doesn't mean you're making an accurate tax payment. It means you're paying what you owed last year. And what you owed last year is not going to be what you owe this year if this year's income is radically different. And so something I find really important to teach people, and it's part of why I created my program, Money Bootcamp, is that you need to know, because you are in a group of people who has really fluctuating income, it's really powerful to understand how estimated taxes work and how you can adjust your payments when your income goes up or down. In other words, to be more on top of calculating your estimated quarterly tax payment each quarter based on that quarter's income. This is how you stay on top of what you actually owe, and not just a random kind of IRS safe harbor rule, but something that's more close to what is the truth. Okay. Now, the point there is that way you are really staying ahead of your tax bill. And you're not going to face, for example, if you get a really big jump in income this year, you could pay taxes based on last year's tax and you could avoid penalties and interest, and that's good. But you're going to owe fundamentally a lot more money in tax in a year you made a lot more money. And so what might happen to you if you're paying that way is that when you get your tax bill this year, it's huge and you didn't know that was going to happen. And that can turn what was a really good year into a really bad year very quickly. You don't want to face a huge tax bill. This can be very harmful when you're running a small business with lean margins, right? So knowing what's coming when it comes to your taxes, staying on top of it in real time so you don't get a surprise that's built up over a year. This is one of my main drivers for creating the education I do in my program, because I keep seeing over and over this happening to people who have creative businesses, who have businesses where your income might fluctuate really dramatically. Okay. So I think it's really important to know that that is just a thing that happens, that can happen to you, and that there's a solution. There's something you can do about it. All right. Okay. That is my episode today about the big mistakes I see people making with accountants. By the way, there's a lot of really wonderful accountants out there. This is really not meant to say that accountants are bad. The industry standards are bad. I will say that. But I do think that a lot of accountants are getting wiser and starting to come to their practices with more emotional intelligence and more sense of communicating with their clients as being a part of their job, whereas I think old school accountants don't see that as part of their job. And it's part of the reason that so many of us, even when we spend a lot of money to work with an accountant, feel completely mystified by what our own tax situation is. So I don't want you to feel that way. The point of the work that I do is I want you to know what tax credits are available to you, how you can get all that money, how you can stay on top of your quarterly taxes and not get radical tax surprises that really hurt you and put you in a terrible position. And also, I want you to feel respected. I think it's really important for you to feel that the work you do in the world is really valuable. You know that, you feel that in your gut, and it really just feels better to work with people who also know that. So that's what I think about working with accountants. I do one-on-one consults. So if you're interested in a consult with me, those are available. And they're also something that when you join Money Bootcamp, you get one of those consults for free. And so I do have a lot of one-on-one consultations with people, and I love it. It's the favorite part of what I do. So speaking of Money Bootcamp, I am giving a 1-hour free class, a free live class to teach you some of these principles. It's basically like a handbook for the scary parts of self-employment. So we're going to talk about taxes, estimated quarterly tax payments, legal setup, retirement, and investing. And I want you to think about the kind of like ease and time that it would open up in your life, in your creative practice, in your care-based practice, if you had those things settled, if you had those scary things taken care of. Okay. So you're invited to join me in just 2 weeks in this free live training called Understand Your Taxes and Make Money, the ultimate guide to the hard parts of self-employment. I'm doing this class to teach you a couple really basic elements of how to understand your taxes better, how to do it better. And then I will be talking about my program in a little more depth so you can understand what's in it, if it's a good fit for you or not, what's included, and what it will do for you. Okay. So I invite you to join me in this live class, and you can go to go.sunlighttax.com/free to register for the live class. It's 1 hour, September 21st. You will get the recording if you're signed up. So if you can't make the time, don't worry about it. Right after the class, I'll send out the recording. So I hope to see you live on September 21st. I'm really excited about it. It's all updated and refreshed, and it's going to be a good time. You're going to learn, even if you decide that Money Bootcamp is not a good fit for you and you don't want to join, it's just a valuable hour. It's a really valuable class. I try to teach a lot about your taxes, about how they work, common mistakes, and a framework for really fixing your situation. So no matter who you are, if you want to join Money Bootcamp or if you don't, it is a valuable class, and I think you'll get a lot out of it. And certainly if you're thinking about Money Bootcamp and kind of wondering what's in it and if it could be good for you, then you'll learn about the program there, and you'll have an opportunity to join and get a bonus free one-on-one session with me to go over your specific tax and business setup questions, which is my favorite kind of consult to do. I absolutely love talking to people with new or not new creative practices and helping you triage the hard stuff you do need to handle right away and how to do that, and the stuff that can wait and when you need to actually engage the next parts, right? Because the whole point to me is to keep you out of overwhelm and just focused on the things you actually do need to do versus knowing the things you don't have to worry about for 5 more years. So again, if you want to come to the free live class, Understand Your Taxes and Make Money, you can go to go.sunlighttax.com/free. You'll get the link in an email, and I will see you on September 21st. I hope you join me. All right. Nice to see you today, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye. Thank you for watching. If you like this video, be sure to like, leave a comment, and subscribe to my channel. I'm so grateful for that. This video is for education and entertainment only. Nothing in this episode should be taken as individual tax or financial advice. You can find all the tools, books, and links I reference at sunlighttax.com/podcast.